So the titles don't really indicate any subject matter. They're just titles that are funny plays on words that I like. They're both originals. The first one was called Always Sometimes. So the way I write basically is a bit mysterious in the sense that the song begins just with a couple of chords. I write always on the guitar. And when I compose as chord melodies. So the melodies and the chords happen together. And they begin as small exercises, almost as though I were accompanying a solo. And then I realize that there's enough melodic content that it might be the beginning of a song. I have no idea where it's going or how long it will be. I'm using some rough ideas about how I feel about chords. So they're kind of pianistic voicings in nature, influenced by piano more than guitar. So some close intervals in the chords, some open strings, a little bit of inner voice movement. Some friends have said it reminds them a little bit of some classical composition. One person remarked on the internet that it sounded a little like the Cuban composer Leo Brouwer, who's an amazing guitarist and composer, although I don't know much of Brouwer's work, but he's wonderful. So that maybe it's just a happy accident that maybe something of Brouwer somehow came into my playing or writing. But I sometimes hear other chords from other guitarists. Alan Holdsworth, who is an incredible fusion player. I don't sound anything like him, but I use chords that are similar to ones that he liked. And I just find myself playing a chord and realizing that maybe it's something that he might have done also. One portion of another tune a friend said sounded a little like Debussy. Again, something that was not conscious at all. So I think I tell other composers or students who are interested in composing, if you listen to a lot of great melodies, you have a rough frame of reference in terms of what pleases your ear and your aesthetic sensibilities, and this might guide you a little bit, even if it's almost in a subconscious way. Also, my songs generally are short. They're usually not more than 25 or 30 bars. They're not consciously 32 bar. I don't strive for an even length necessarily. I don't strive for diatonic harmony. This is the predictable harmony. But other than that, it's kind of random. I don't really know where they're going. The second one is Springfield Sonata. It's not really a classical sonata. It's a little play on words. I don't have any classical training, so it's not really a sonata. Springfield is the town where my girlfriend lives, so sometimes they're just little funny titles. I just strive for something that's not predictable, and I didn't decide to end on the 5. It just happened that way, and I felt this is a place to end the tune. It just suggested itself to me, and I stopped there. Many people would resolve to the 1 chord. I typically like to do things that are a little unexpected. So if I see a 4-bar phrase, sometimes I will delay or anticipate a chord so that it feels like a 3-beat phrase or something other than even symmetrical length phrases. And my writing is this way also. Mm-hmm. Also my improvising. I just got attracted to asymmetrical phrasing, things that are less predictable. Just my ear gravitated towards that many years ago. The Baroque composers of that era, Bach, probably Haydn, Mozart for sure, they were improvisers. So what you're hearing really is improvisation. They could improvise in this style. This tradition kind of went away during the Romantic period, but those people could improvise. Some Romantic composers also could. I think Beethoven probably could. Well, you understand also in Bach's case, before maybe midway in his career, they had the well-tempered clavier. They had tempered tuning. Suddenly you could compose in all the keys. Before that, you could only compose in a few keys. Yeah. So he wrote the well-tempered clavier to demonstrate the fact that he could modulate now into all the keys. So the language dramatically changed in Bach's time as they improved the instruments. And some of those titles of the pieces that he wrote were essentially dances. So Chacon or Gigue, the people were dancing to this music. It was popular music. Mm-hmm. But he did absolutely dramatically expand the tonal palettes and the vocabulary of the time. I mean, the B minor Bass at the time was not well received. It was too long and too complex for most people. Mm-hmm. And when he was older, he had many children, some of whom were composers, and at the end of his life, he was called the Old Bach. People thought that his children might surpass him. And he basically was not performed for about 100 years. Liszt and I think Mendelssohn, 100 years later, said, hey, we should really start to perform him again. So they helped revive interest in Bach 100 years after he died. But, musicians who are visionaries, they don't always have the easiest time of it. Artists in general, if they're visionaries, if you're doing something that's not popular, that people don't expect or understand, you don't necessarily have a very easy time of it. And yet these people have this beautiful, strong, creative impulse they have to create. It doesn't matter if people like it. They're compelled to create. They're on a path, and they know that this isn't the right direction for them. Yeah, it's partly work ethic, but also I would not be happy doing anything else. And if I had to stop playing, I would be miserable. So clearly, regardless of how successful I will or won't be, I should be trying to be a musician. I felt this way from the time I was a little kid, long before I was good enough to make a living at it, with no real plan. It just happened that I was lucky enough to fall into teaching, and I could put the two together, playing and teaching, and make a very modest living. And the touring happened also by accident. It was not a plan. I don't sound like anybody else exactly, so when you first hear me, if you have not heard me before, if you're coming to a club or a master class, you've never heard me, thankfully with the internet now people have a chance to sort of preview what you are before they meet you. So sometimes at workshops now or gigs, people will say, I saw you, I looked at you online before I came. But because it's not the usual vocabulary, it sounds maybe a little abstract or confusing to people. So what I try to do to pull them in is play something that I think is beautiful, whether or not they've heard it before. Most of the songs I'm playing also are not popular songs. People haven't heard the material either. And the way I improvise on the songs is not in the usual way. So part of my job is to somehow pull the audience in. Part of that is actually speaking to the audience, maybe including them in the process by talking a bit about the composer or some little piece of information that I can do to somehow illustrate why I chose a song, or so to get them to introduce them to me personally as well as musically. And I tell students it's important to talk to the audience if it's a listening room. But I can certainly play a little more versatile style or other styles besides the way I compose. So I like to do standards sometimes, or bossa novas, or more traditional jazz music that would be more accessible to the average jazz audience, absolutely. But in my own gigs, I'm not always doing my own music, but I'm doing tunes people that haven't heard, the tunes that people have not heard probably. But again, I would argue if they're beautiful, it's okay. I mean, Jobim wrote these beautiful, accessible bossa novas, and unless you're Brazilian, everybody plays 4 or 5 of them. He wrote 400 of them. So why not play one that's also beautiful that nobody knows? So we do a few, we've done a few in Hong Kong while I've been here with Chiho and his group that people don't know. And they're beautiful. So I think to challenge the audience a little bit is fine. My songs, you're not going to sing those melodies right away, for sure. And I'm not deliberately composing songs that are obscure. I'm just composing things that I hear that I like. And again, not worrying about if someone else will like it, quite honestly. Not everybody will. That doesn't bother me. So I still love Jim Hall on the guitar. I still love Herbie Hancock and Bill Evans on the piano. I still love Cannonball Adderley on the alto saxophone. I still love Sonny Rollins on the tenor saxophone, and many others. But that music that pulled me in, actually initially I started as a rock player, and then a lot of people my age got pulled into jazz by some of the earliest fusion, which was very different from fusion as we know it now. So that was Weather Report, Bitches Brew, and In a Sound Away from Miles Davis. And so we heard rock energy and rock sounds, but with this harmonic vocabulary that we didn't recognize that sounded really interesting. So that pulled us in, and then we went back and heard some of the earlier music from those people. It's a travel guitar that collapses, it comes apart. So it's headless, the neck is graphite bolted onto a piece of maple, and what looks like a body are just plastic tubes to give me the shape of the body. And my girlfriend Louise created a little cloth jacket for it, so from far away it kind of looks like the whole body is wooden, but it is not. So that part of the body comes off, and it goes in a very small rectangular case, so it always gets taken inside the airplane cabin with me. It never gets checked. And the man who designed it and built it is a man named Roscoe Wright, who also lives in Oregon where I live, and the company's called SoloEtte. Yeah, it's an Andy Timmons DiMarzio humbucker in the neck position, and it's an active Piezo system from Richard McClish called RMC. And I'm using mostly the neck position with a bit of the Piezo blended in. Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you that a lot of the tone, any guitar player will tell you this, especially if you're not using a lot of effects. Effects tend to mask the individual sound of a guitar player's hands, but a lot of your sound is in your hands. So I sound a little like myself even on your Herb Ellis ES-165 with the baritone tuning. It still is my personality and more or less my sound. So part of it is your hands. For a while I used process sounds and guitar synthesizers in the 90s, and I stopped all that. And a lot of other guys of my generation have also. And now it's just a little bit of digital reverb and stereo, that's all. So you're just hearing the hands. And in my case it's hybrid picking, so it's a combination of pick and fingers with the right hand. So I'm trying to balance the two and make it sound more like sort of a pianistic sound on the guitar. So that kind of sets me apart. And I think the chords and the way I approach improvising also are pretty original sounding. And I tell students, if you want to have the experience to do some touring, anybody can do it if you're willing to assemble a network of musicians that you like, who like to play with you, and we help each other creating opportunities where we live. So mostly I'm playing with people where I'm going. They create the work for me. Very often I stay with them. So this kind of grassroots approach to playing and touring has made it possible for me to do it. Most people, I think, are probably happier being amateur musicians. And amateur comes from a Latin word meaning to love. Amateur is not a bad or a negative word at all. And I tell people, unless you're really, really in love with music and really feel compelled to play it, it's a wonderful hobby. It should be your hobby, not your living. Too many ups and downs. Every successful player will tell you the same thing: rejections, frustrations, problems. And that's the really successful guys, not to mention people like me. So we all have rejections and frustrations, and also frustrations with our playing and our ability to want to play better. Very often I listen to myself and think, this could be better right now. But I do feel still so slow progress moving in a direction, so that keeps me going. That's what motivates me more than anything, just the love of trying to make my craft better.